Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm starting a new series of interviews where I would request some of the famous and recognized people in their fields to come and speak to us, but not on their usual stuff, not on what they do, but their approach to life, their views, which I call the parallel views, or something which is different, something that is really a gap that they could fill in terms of perception, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of opinions. So I hope that you would like this series, and we would start with our first interview soon. Viewers, I'm pleased to announce that today we are talking to Lucia Klestincova. She's a leading EU person, or let's say have an insight on the EU. But let me introduce her to you formally by reading her biography before going to the interview. Lucia is a known voice of the transformation of the European Union via new culture, leadership and women empowerment. She is a European policymaker, a podcast host, founder of several women networks, and a career coach for young leaders aiming to get inwards and upwards on the European leadership ladder. During 7 years of her career at the European Commission, one of the main institutions of the European Union, her responsibilities ranged from managing preparations of the European businesses for Brexit to rolling out gender equality in all EU policies, and her reputation for creative entrepreneur, passionate about the world-class transformation, gets her invited to shape projects for modernizing the corporate culture. She is convinced that what of the European policy solutions is not going to succeed unless we profoundly shift the how of policy design and communication. That is why every year of her career she takes on an experiment disrupting the operation and perception of European public service. This includes running as a candidate for the 2019 European Parliament elections and or launching the podcast Light on Europe, an opportunity for you to discover the human story behind the Brussels. In her free time, she is a mentor and a career coach, having supported hundreds of young talents across the EU in their decision whether and how to join the EU's public service. And that is the reason we have requested her to give her time and share some of the views on these topics. So let's go to the interview that we had to do on Zoom due to the lockdown situation. Let's go. A very warm welcome, Lucia. Thank you very much for your time to give to my channel, Synergic Media. I know that you're quite a busy professional. Of course, everyone in Brussels is very busy, particularly nowadays. And I really appreciate that you have consented to give us some insights and, as you say, throw some light on European perspective. We have a wide variety of viewers. But of course, what we would be expecting from you is not the usual question, not the usual policy-making business in Brussels of not what, but how. And I think that is the point that you have always in your podcast and others been saying, that we need to focus on how part of this thing. So before starting, of course, I've given your introduction in the start of this video, but if you can kindly let us know your journey from B to B, from Bratislava to Brussels. Who you are, how did you end up over here? Because a lot of people actually would be fascinating or getting inspiration from you. So if you can briefly share with us your journey.
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I find that this kind of bridges inter-institutional and inter-countries is always very enriching for our audiences. So thank you very much. I hope it's going to be enriching for everybody listening.
I'm sure.
I'm thinking how to best outline the journey, because obviously I'm not gonna talk about my whole CV here, but basically the idea was that I always felt intrigued or interested in working for the international organizations. United Nations was the ultimate dream for me and the reason why I went to study international relations. So it was somehow always in the cards, and during my university studies I always did internships and work experiences all around the world. And after a couple of work experiences abroad in Slovakia, and after having done my second master's in policymaking in London, I was lucky enough that I passed the the competition, the recruitment process to the European institutions, and that's how I ended up in Brussels. I don't know if we want to go at some stage also into the recruitment process as such, because it's on the one hand very complicated process, but on the other hand very interesting side of policymaking careers for those who are interested in pursuing EU careers. So I'll be happy to share more about my journey. But basically, for me, the story was really of being passionate about international relations and European affairs. When I was growing up in Slovakia in the 90s and at the verge of the millennia, integration into the European Union was the light at the end of the tunnel, really, for the whole Central European region. And so it somehow felt natural that we were all fascinated and dreaming to some extent of careers with the European institutions. And so when it became possible, I literally jumped on the opportunity and went off to explore what it's like to work for one of the biggest policy-making institutions in the world.
Absolutely, and I'm sure it's quite an honor and prestige to get into that one. In fact, as you mentioned, I did a video, by the way, on people who would be looking for careers in international organization, although that is not our focus for today. But very briefly, if you would like to share some of your thoughts, any, let's say, take-home messages on this recruitment process, because what I often get, as you know, I work for the UN as well, but often people sound like frustrated with the process. Maybe it's a bit complicated, it is competitive, I would say. So what would you like to share with so-called, let's say, aspirants who would like to join the European Union institutions?
Yeah, I think as with any dream that we've got, any big goal that we set for ourselves, it's important to continue tapping into that intrinsic motivation and knowing what our why is. Why are we doing it? Because it is really a very difficult process, very competitive. The odds of passing are very low. And that's legitimate. Obviously, if we want to give somebody the responsibility to have the impact that European policymakers have, I think it's in the interest of all of us that the recruitment process is rather strict. So it's all fine that it's set up the way it is, except it's lengthy and it's complicated, and it takes a lot of energy and discipline of everyday preparation for people to really develop that habit and routine around preparing for the individual steps. It's not a knowledge test. It's really similar to the recruitment procedures done by the biggest consultancies or the biggest organizations in the world, which are competency-based. So it starts with something like an intelligence test, then it continues with a case study that looks in more detail into what is the way you think about policy problems, disregarding of whether you know anything about the policy area or not. And then it tests your skills in an assessment center where it's looking more at the team dynamics and how the candidates operate in cooperation and competition with other candidates. So it's hard, but it's also a super interesting life experience. I really recommend it for everybody who is somehow interested in trying it out. You can start a process from any member state. The test can be done in any member state in multiple languages and for free. So if it's something that you're simply interested in out of your passion for European policymaking, or simply to test yourself, how do you benchmark against other really tens of thousands of candidates in Europe, just go ahead and try it. It's always valuable to know upfront how is it that you're really competing against the others, and then maybe next time when you really want to go for it, at least you will have had the experience firsthand on your own skin.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm sure just like the other government or civil services jobs, the EU jobs are also similar, but people have to understand that you have to multiply by 27 in terms of competition, because if you're just competing at national level versus at the Brussels level, it becomes quite tough. And
of course, but it's almost irrelevant. I wouldn't focus on it, because it's disempowering thinking of how many people you're competing against. It's important really to know why you're doing it, and obviously create structure around you when you're preparing. Have coaches and mentors and people who are from within the system or have had some contacts with the system, so they can share with you the right strategies, how to go about the preparation process most effectively. And the fact that it's across the European continent, so what? If you're good, you're gonna get through.
Yeah, but it's as easy to say, as you said, but A lot of people find it difficult, but probably I think there is a key point that you mentioned. It is not a test of the knowledge. It is not that they would check your so-called contents. It is the how part, as you mentioned. It is your internal, let's say, motivation that you want to do something. And when you relate that motivation to a bigger policy sphere, if I could say, so basically how you relate yourself and your internal powers to the ultimate objective. Is that correct? That basically it's much more than just, let's say, being a PhD or something like that, or let's say subject matter specialist. It is a broader...
Yes, it is part of the competency. So at the first stage of the computer-based test, it's really like an IQ test where you do abstract numerical verbal reasoning test that many of us know from elsewhere when we're turning around cubes and figuring out if there's 3 or 4 dots coming up. In the case study stage, it's more looking at really how you think about the policy making solutions. And then in the last stage, it's more focused at what you're saying, all the soft skills. How do we communicate? How do we handle conflict? How resilient are we when we're asked to understand an extremely complex topic very quickly? How do we find compromises in complicated setup of what we call stakeholders in the policymaking world? So people coming together with all kinds of interests, everybody trying to achieve something, and how do we find the common ground so that we can move forward, which are important competencies for policymakers, disregarding of if it's fisheries policy or space policy or future of Eurozone, because the position that we're working on can be changing throughout our life. So it's almost irrelevant whether we have the expertise in a certain area or not at the beginning when we're being hired, because it's likely that we'll somehow move away or sideways from that position. And so if we're hiring for life, which is what is the case for many policymakers, we have to make sure that they have the right skills for the job. And obviously what I forgot to say is also testing foreign language skills. So the candidates must speak at least 2 out of 3 working languages of Brussels, which is English, German, French.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that should be a very good information for people who are looking forward to their journey towards Brussels, as you did.
And obviously, I'm not here to do kind of awareness raising on behalf of the European institutions, but if anybody's interested in finding out more, just Google EU careers, and it's going to give you very user-friendly websites in all member state languages so that you can go deeper into the details of this and also see what are the vacancies and open competitions running now.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, for my viewers, if you're looking for the EU careers, you have to be EU national as well. It's not for everyone.
Yes, yes.
So it's only for the EU.
Yes, we keep on forgetting, you know.
Exactly.
The more we open the geography of the conversation, we have to keep reminding ourselves.
Because of course, you know, the viewership is global over here. Well, thank you for that, Lucia. Now, before going into, let's say, deeper philosophical questions or something, since my conversations or interviews are a little bit different, I want to know a person's perspective on life, you know, something very different. So let me ask you a couple of questions. How would you like to be remembered, you know, as a person? What legacy you want to leave? I mean, should people remember you, let's say, after you leave this world, as a Eurocrat, as a politician, as an impact maker, or how would you like people to remember you forever?
What a question. I would love people to remember me as a kind and light and courageous and impactful human being in the areas that I will have passed through. So whatever I'm trying to do in my life, I try to bring my lightness, if that's value in a sense, and believe that we can, if we are aligned and in flow with who we came here to be, we can create massive impact in transforming the way organizations, structures, nations, or big entities operate. So that is my biggest passion, and that's what I understood after several years of working, or even in the projects that I'm doing outside of my formal professional engagement, that's what I'm best at, really bridging the worlds which normally don't understand each other because they don't seem to speak the same language, and broadening up the horizons for people who seem to be either stuck and not knowing how to move ahead, or having a big vision, wanting to create some kind of big social project and not knowing how to go about it. So I hope to be remembered for this, kind of having impacted either the organizations that I'm working with or individuals that I work with along the way, either as a podcast host or a coach or whatever role that I have or that I will have in the decades to come, that I will have impacted their life through seeing a new possibility and broadening up the horizons and bringing fun and lightness into it, because I think that there's a lot of overwhelm coming out of the reflections around how can we change the world and how can we be the change. It could be a very overwhelming place to be, so it's important to continue having fun along the way.
Well, that's brilliant. I think your last point is particularly to be noticed, because not a lot of people think about the fun side or the lighter side. People take things too seriously, I would say. But on your previous point, I think probably at all of our levels, we can build bridges. As you said, we can build the knowledge bridges, the social bridges, perception bridges, communications, and so on and so forth across. And that could be our best contribution as individual human beings. Of course, we do in our professional, or let's say the set professional lives, whatever we do, but then we can do much more than that, and not necessarily with huge resources or platforms or power. We all are equally empowered as human beings to build that bridges. And I guess the work that you are of course doing much better in terms of podcasts and others, and I've started doing it through YouTube, is also building a bridge in a way, building this perception and knowledge bridges. So thank you for that. Now, moving to the next question, to let's say know your perception better. Let's say you have you are given 7 days with unlimited resources, unlimited power. What would you like to do in those 7 days? How would you spend those 7 days without any limitations or restrictions on you, financial or let's say power or traveling or whatever?
What would I like to do for myself or for the world or for?
Well, that could be, of course. In fact, the next question was that, or you can club 2 questions. Out of those 7 days, 1 day would be, what can you do for the world to change for better in 1 day? So 6 days on you and 1 for others.
You know what I love the most? It somehow touches on the whole narrative of work-life balance that I never quite understood, because I've always felt very passionate around the work that I'm doing, and it's just so closely related to my life, so I don't really distinguish the two. And so my biggest dream is to continue doing the change-making world and bridging and empowering and communicating and bringing the new culture of collaboration and communication about social impact creation and leadership for the world, combining that with lifestyles that make people happy, because I feel that oftentimes people feel, and I've been brought up in that context, that with that software as well, that it's either or, that either you have either you love your lifestyle, or you can work for an impactful big organization, and if you're part of that organization, you have to give up part of your self-expression, creativity, freedom. And so if sky was the limit, I would like to merge the two in terms of the workplace. For instance, in 1 week, being able to work from a Bali spa resort, being able to work from ski slopes of Switzerland, being able to be in Amazon rainforest and speaking to the Aboriginal inhabitants there, really combining the well-being and the daily routines and the me time that I love having, and nourishing my soul and body with all kinds of practices and learning and exploration that I love doing. And at the same time, continuing what I'm doing, which means being a European policymaker, being a podcast host, being a life coach, being an author, all these things, which thanks to technology can be done from anywhere. At the same time, if sky was the limit, I would fly over wherever I am, fly over my parents to spend some time with them, fly over my friends, really create that feeling of having it all in terms of nourishment and growth and self-expression within that 1 week.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I think, that's what basically we are missing as human beings, isn't it? This work-life balance, as you mentioned, we have got so much in a way. There is an abundance of our wishes and desires, and when these are met, we probably lose the value. In economic terms, as you know, this law of diminishing marginal utility, that applies quite, let's say, appropriately to us in this time of let's say, the civilization. But that leads to the next question, in a way, more or less connected question. Technology, we know that it has made our life better. Nothing against technology. But don't you think that it has made our life a little bit more into silos? It has given us something which is more individualistic and less mingling with the others. The type of technology, let's say the communication technologies that we use, it has lost the touch of personal feelings. It has, let's say, eased. For example, we are talking and sitting in different cities or something like that. But had this interview been recorded in Brussels or let's say in Geneva, that would have been a very different thing. Or let's say you talking to your parents over Skype is entirely different than meeting them even for 1 hour. So what is your take on this one? Because the reason I'm asking is that I'm feeling that now is the time that people are trying to retract from this extreme advancement, and people have started feeling that we need to slow down and we need to get a little bit more personal. And the recent lockdown has, I think, quite to a great extent has taught us this lesson. So your views on that?
I think it's not the fault of technology. I think we are the owners of our life and the quality of relationships that we have. And so the depth of the relationships and the connections that we have thanks to the technology only depend on how we show up in that conversation. I've had some of the deepest and closest relationships with people from other side of the planet, which I've never met in my life, simply because we've been through very deep transformation work within a safe space of very intimate and transformative conversations, which can then be a foundation for a very lifelong relationship. And it creates such an intimate connection, which I almost with some people that I have from, I don't know, friends from Canada or friends from Japan, connections which I don't really have with people who are geographically closest to me. So my opinion on this is that it's really up to us how we use technology. It's really just the device in our hands, and it's up to us to choose what's the quality of conversations that we're having. After half an hour conversation, I think that our exchange is already so much more deeper than what I would have had over a beer with whoever I can just randomly meet in the street, if you see what I mean. So I think it's rather in our hands. Obviously, the lockdown has shown a lot our awareness of the extent of our dependency and addiction to these devices, and our ability to manage the time we spend and the quality and the structure of the time that we spend with the devices. Myself, I've gifted myself for a birthday that I had in July an offline detox at a retreat that I went to, where I was offline for almost a week, because I also felt that after months of work with 4 screens at the same time, it was getting a bit too much on my nerves. But it's still not the fault of the technology. It really takes our own inner mastery to simply decide when we're switching off and how much power we give to technology. So obviously it is a skill that we have to build. It's a muscle that we have to train, and the temptation is extremely high with the devices being attached to our bodies. So it takes a lot of work for us to be aware and decide simply what's the power that we're giving to the devices. But I don't agree with people who tend to like promote this narrative around technology not enabling human connections. Also in the coaching community, I meet many coaching professionals who tend to prefer, obviously we all prefer human contact, but they would discard the possibility of coaching through technology, which I find is a loss for whoever could be their client, which is just the Zoom call away. So as I said, I think it's in our hands. What is it that we're creating with what's possible?
I think that's very interesting perspective. Of course, we know technology is an enabler. There is no point in that. I mean, no basically opposition to that point. But of course, how do we use that? I think we as human beings are often comfort seekers. We don't really, we just go for the comforting part and we don't really care much. But you're right, it is in our hands. How do we use? And you were lucky to detox for 1 week. My maximum has been 17 hours. Not even 24 hours for that. That's how we are.
I think we can all start with little challenges here and there, like just, how we can measure the online time on the phone. Just be aware of what the machine is telling us about our behaviors. And then I think we can all schedule a couple of hours offline per week or an offline day a month, or it's really up to everybody's lifestyle and what's possible and what's not. But I think typically a situation would be that more offline time is possible than what we normally think. We just need to work around it and organize ourselves, and then notice what's happening in our heads when there's no immediate stimuli coming our way and some discomfort might be arising, and we just have to deal with it because there's no device to distract us.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you very much for that, Lucia. Now, we move to the second part of the conversation, a little bit, let's say, deeper or philosophical, if I might say that. I've heard a lot of your podcasts and the videos, and of course, you are a real life coach, or let's say transformational change agent. I don't know if it makes sense, but you're basically trying to have an impact or a change on that one. Now, for our views, my views are generic in a way. They're not necessarily the policy professionals or others. If I can request you to sort of summarize your various podcasts on particularly 2 points, if it is possible at all, or if you can substantiate with some other discussion. First is that at the global level or the regional or EU or even at the national levels, on the policy making process, we know that there is a certain political process that is involved, and we know that what are those processes. We know who are the stakeholders and so on and so forth. So that is the mechanical part, I think. What oftentimes we do not understand or focus is the soul of that policy making. How and why exactly are we making those policies? Of course, the philosophers would say that, there's always a goal that you want to achieve. There's a target that the politicians would say that. But would you like to share some of these reflections on so-called the missing angles or missing perspectives that we do not see on the policy making process? You can use, of course, the EU example if you wish, or even in generic term or abstract terms as well. So over to you.
Maybe to set a bit the context for the conversation as I see it, if I may outline the origins of the podcast. So my podcast, Lights on Europe, is a project that I've started last year after my experience of being a candidate in the European elections, when I was really spending thousands of hours in the streets of Slovakia discussing about European Union with the general public and tapping much deeper into my own understanding of how people feel as citizens of the EU, what are the reasons for them not showing up in the elections, because Slovakia is chronically known for the lowest turnout rates, and understanding that it's not the content of the policy making that is interesting for them. They couldn't care less about what I thought about European army or future of Eurozone or the climate emergency, because they know we are the experts and they know that the world is complicated enough for them to try to understand the policy making process and the nature of the policy solutions what I felt the people I spoke to wanted is really just to have a reason to trust me as the first person ever that they've met in real life from the Brussels bubble. And I think this might be symptomatic for other policymaking hubs around the world, where people feel detached from that world. They feel that we are detached from their world, hence not being connected or responsive enough to their daily problems. Once they've understood why I care, why I swapped my cool entrepreneurial lifestyle for going and work in a bureaucracy in one of the most rainiest, I guess, cities in Europe, why is it that I would embark on this career? Why is it that I care? How do I bring my heart and soul, as you said, to the process? It somehow gave them an understanding and that feeling of trust that it finally would validate or give them a reason to go and show up in the elections. And so this is the context in which I started the podcast, when after I got back to the Brussels, I felt I wanted to continue that bridging that we were talking about, giving people more insights into who are the souls behind the policymaking process, who are these people that they never see, because typically as policymaking institutions or any regulatory body in the world, we obviously communicate what is the regulatory result, what is the content of the legislation and policies that we're producing. But apart from the spokesperson or the minister or the commissioner in case of the European Commission, you rarely see who is the army of people who have co-created that process, which creates this sense of suspicion, like any other unknown. It just creates this question mark in people's minds, and I thought that it would create additional input, which might then translate into increased awareness and probably trust in the European institutions and the whole European Union integration process. And so that's coming back to your question. I think that's what's the missing piece, where obviously I understand all the context, the rules for an apolitical, neutral policy-making body and the administration, which, obviously there's the accountability rules are there for a reason, and it doesn't mean that we're all going to go off and wild and communicate what we want. But I think that really removing that veil and showing people who we are, what is our story, where is that passion for that policy process coming from, what is our individual wish and dream for that area, it can add a whole new aliveness to that conversation, which I find is missing. But it's really just my personal belief that is based on probably a relevant number of conversations. But since not too many of us are doing this, probably I might be wrong, but looking at the feedback that I'm getting through doing my podcast, it seems to have added an interesting piece into the puzzle of awareness raising about the institutions, not just for the general public, but especially also for what is one of your primary audiences, the future policymakers, the young professionals who are thinking about how is it that they can bring their talent to the European policymaking space. It's thanks to the podcast interviews where they understand a little bit more how is it that being in and around the European policymaking bubble feels, how to manage your career, how to manage your own happiness once you're in the bubble, which gives them those insights which can be very valuable in taking important decisions in life.
Well, excellent. I think that's a very commendable step in what you're doing. Let me add to that one, being from a developing country originally, I can tell you that the European countries or European institutions are, of course, far better because, of course, the Europe has much more democratic maturity, if I could say that. But if you look at the developing countries, the understanding of this rationality of policy making is quite absent. Of course, I'm being very strong on that one, but the reason is that most of the legislature functions are not really scrutinized or seen by a general public in a fashion that it should be. One, that probably there are not many bridges like you are doing, basically lifting that veil of legislator between the legislatures and the public. And secondly, most of the times the members of the parliaments are more or less seen from a facilitator to the executive organ of the state. people, the voters, the supporters, and the general public in their constituencies see them as an enabler for whatever bottlenecks or others in the executive part of the government they would face from day to day. So I think in developing countries or in regions like my original region, it is even more needed. People need to know who are, let's say, these so-called people, that we elect, but what do they do over there and why do they do that? Because of course, whatever is done in terms of policy, whether it is the regulatory side or the constitutional side or whatever, it has far-reaching impacts. It really impacts each and every one of us. So probably I think the take-home or probably the best point of our conversation would be an awareness all across the world for people to see into these type of things. For whatever channel they have availability in their respective countries and constituencies, but something should be done in this rationale of the policy making part. So thank you very much for that. I think that's a very interesting one, and that is relevant for all over the world, not just Europe. As I said, you're lucky that in Europe you have much more developed democratic systems, much more transparent institutional structures as well in a way, to a great extent than many other countries. Okay, so
if I may, sorry.
Yes, please.
If I may add a thought on this, I think God bless technology in this instance. I would want to hope and believe that in many of lesser developed countries around the world, technically all of this is possible to do as well. The information that we're discussing on the podcast isn't dangerous in any way for the institutions. It is only up to the guests to decide to which degree they want to be authentic and show their vulnerability and that authentic life story that's deep down that they are willing to share with the audience. So I think the important question here to ask is, what is it that we can do to empower people who would like to be doing it in their countries back at home? What is it that's holding them back? Because sometimes it is just barriers in our minds where we don't know how to go about shaping that project, when we just don't know where to start. And there's so many questions. Obviously, I had those million questions at the beginning as well. It just takes a lot of courage and vulnerability at the beginning, and the willingness to really play and fail. Because when I look at my first podcast, I'm embarrassed, but that's part of the journey. It's like any entrepreneurial journey where you're embarrassed by the first product that you launched. You just gotta get going. And so in case somebody's listening out there, if you feel that I can be helpful in any way in sharing my personal experience, just reach out and I'll be happy to see if there's something that we can co-create simply by removing those barriers which are in our minds. I'm not discussing if there's technical or whatever legal, or as you're saying, democratical, political system barriers kind of stuff, although everything's here to be disrupted at one way or another, right? Or at one stage or another. It really just takes the momentum and the bravery of people and the tribe around them, which I feel is responsible to empower. If we see people who are talented around us, where we see the leadership potential, I think that it's responsibility of each and every one of us to just check in with them and see how is it that we can support them. Excellent.
By the way, for the viewers, the link to website of Lucia and the podcast, you can see on bottom of the screen. So you can either note that, or probably I think if it is clickable, you can just go directly to that, and I'll give in the description as well. Staying on that one, Lucia, thank you. In my view, barring, let's say, one or few countries, probably all of the other countries, whether more democratic or less democratic, do have a possibility that this bridge could be built. But unfortunately, in my view, a lot of countries, or let's say people, do not even know whether this is possible. Because what happens is that oftentimes we see either a very critical look or a critical, or let's say criticism on the government side. From so-called the civil society or others, or we have an extremely pro-government type of things. So there has to be something in between, without being critical, without being judgmental, something which is more of a transparency, which is more of in the nature of inclusiveness, to show them how this is done and why this is done. And that is the missing piece. I think a lot of countries or a lot of people out there like you need to fulfill that. And I'm sure this would be a message that could reach potentially to many, and they can try to build those bridges in their countries. So thank you very much for that. Now, moving to the next part, which is, let's say, your forte, if I could say, the women empowerment or the gender empowerment. We know that this is, let's say, the subject nowadays. Of course, it is quite late. It should have happened quite a while ago, but better late than never. At global level, we know at all levels, whether it is UN or the countries or even corporate sector, there's a lot that is happening. But still, we don't see, of course, I mean, there's nothing ideal, it will take some time. It's a process. It will be done in a probably slow fashion as well. It takes time to remove the status quo. But what are your reflections on that one? Because you're focusing quite a lot on that. And I think Europe is another, let's say, positive point of Europe is that your institutions are quite good in terms of the gender empowerment. So they're enabling all of that one. But still there might be some challenges, still there might be some points that are overlooked, as you mentioned in your previous conversation as well. Oftentimes we do not see the whole picture. So what are those missing pieces that you would like our viewers to focus on?
Yeah. As you're saying, in Europe, we're quite lucky that we are now, as European institutions, we're led by the first female president, who is the big sponsor of gender equality agenda. We have the first commissioner in charge of equality. We adopted a very packed gender equality action plan early this year. So the possibility is there to achieve a lot in terms of gender equality by the end of this commission's mandate. Now, what I feel is the missing piece of the conversation is that once we've dealt with the numbers, we have to continue looking at the quality, which means, what I'm trying to say here is that the gender equality conversation oftentimes focuses on the numbers game, as in participation in the labor market, the volume of the pay gap, participation of female parliamentarians, politicians, what is the pension gap, what is the number of sexual assaults, etc., 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 which is all extremely important problems, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance, but it is the tip of the iceberg. An important part of the conversation, which I found is often missing simply because it's more complicated, is what is the business case behind the diversity? What is it that we're gaining as institutions, as society, as businesses, if we have diversity among our staff, on our boards, among our suppliers, looking at diversity aspects of our clients? All this can result in a different quality of conversations, collaborations, different quality of products and services that we are providing, including different quality of the policymaking process. I think that women and men, simply by definition, both have feminine and masculine sides to them, and it takes some awareness and some inner work for us to be able to distinguish the two and know which one we want to tap into at which occasion. Sometimes we need to be more, collaborative listening, looking for that caring, nourishing, motherly attitude of looking for solutions that are tailor-made and work for everybody, super inclusive and phased. You see what I mean? We all know what mothering feels like. And then as the opposite of it is the masculine way of leading organizations and procedures, which is very directive, efficiency, results-focused, top-down. I tell you how, you listen and do it, which has been the dominant way of leading and creating until now. It has produced some results, some good and some worse, for humanity and for the planet. And now it's time to realize that we've been ignoring the other leadership style, and that there's value to it, and that both men and women can lead from that space, that it's not a gendered conversation. I've had many bosses and colleagues and collaborators who are beautiful masters of tapping into that feminine side in them. And that's what I feel is the next level of conversation about leadership that we need for the world. And it's not just European policy making. As I said, I'm part of the networks which are global, where we see women and men transforming entire sectors of the economy and of the society, thanks to different quality of conversation and collaboration that they are bringing to it.
Thank you. I think that's another very important point that people used to, or still I think a lot of people would ignore. It's not just the quantity. I think you have hinted at a very sensitive point, if I could say, at least in our international system that I operate in Geneva at the multilateral level. There is already a feeling over here as well that in the name of gender equality, we have been focusing a little bit more on the numbers, to have, let's say, equal number of women in the leadership positions and so on and so forth, as you mentioned. But probably it's a time to focus not on the quality, as you mentioned, but of course, developing the institutional mechanism from, let's say, bottom-up approach, which basically enables women to compete themselves or empower themselves automatically, rather than, let's say, giving them, if I can use this word, special and differential treatment. So we have to focus on that one, because that's the ultimate goal. We have to basically fill in those gaps that were somehow, socially gaps were left in different societies or regions or whatever. So it's a good point that the gender equality should be gender equity as well, and gender empowerment in true sense in all spheres and all stages, not just picking one and putting them on let's say these senior positions. So thank you for that. I think that's interesting. Well, we are coming towards the end of the interview, but you have given very good insights, some really bridging the gap type of ideas that you have shared with us. Is there anything else that you would like to share on your own, something which is quite unique in terms of the perspective? Because I'm sure that my viewers who are serious and who are still glued to this video and who have not left, that means they are genuinely interested to hear some of the new views and new perspectives. So the floor is yours, as we say.
Wow, what an open question. This is, I guess, the tough one, because there's a lot we could say. I think the magic is just in continuing one's inner work and the exploration and playing with exploring different possibilities. And it's not that I have it all figured out. I'm equally exploring my journey as well. Where I feel that the difference comes from is doing the inner work and understanding what is it that we're trying to bring to the world, and then having fun in playing how was the form that it could take. So if anybody resonates with what I'm saying, as you said, they can go and check out the podcast or check out my website. I'm now also working on a book, which is going to summarize season 1 of Lights on Europe podcast. So I don't know when this interview will be released. Maybe the book will be out by then. So everybody's welcome to check that out as well. It's going to be a nice summary of thoughts about what are the principles and values behind the new cultural leadership, as I say, the new vision for what the leadership for European Union and humanity could look like, as per the interviews that we were doing the past year. And hopefully, again, it's going to be a nice bridge into the season 2, where I would like to be going deeper into the inner work that the leaders are doing for themselves in order so they can show up as more aligned and impactful leaders in the area that is close to their heart. So I guess that's my last thought, that if anybody resonates with what I'm saying here, just feel free to check out these resources or get in touch via social media, wherever you are in the world, and I'll be happy to explore how is it that we can learn from each other and lift each other up, because that's what's turning out the most important or the missing piece of the puzzle for us, in particular now after the lockdown, where most of our networks and relationships have been tested quite radically, at least in the world that I'm part of, where we feel much better what was the quality of the connections that we had once we went into the lockdown. And as we're going out, we see that we've lost some and we are missing some, and many people feel at the beginning of something new, and that's where it's super important to recreate our tribes and have the right supporters and mentors and coaches and just the cheerleader tribe around us, which is going to be our supporters along the way, because there's always enough naysayers who tell us that we're the weird ones out, and why don't you just stay comfortable in your comfort zone, as you're saying, and just continue doing the red race. But if you feel that there's something missing, just go ahead and have fun exploring it without making a big deal out of it. As you're saying, we are sometimes going from being perfectionist workaholics to being perfectionist inner workers and soul searchers and seeking results very quickly, and that's the first thing that sabotages the process. So it doesn't mean that I'm not doing it, it's just what I am aware of, that is something that is an invitation to consider and maybe something to learn from each other.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And as you said, I think in order to create the impact, we don't have to do something a very big level. In fact, the real impact or the real change comes from single steps or the small steps at the individual levels. And we should understand that at our levels, wherever we are sitting, whatever power or resources we have, we can make a change. We can be part of this change. And I always say that it is better to be agent of the change rather than victim of the change. So try to do whatever we can in terms of positivity, in terms of contribution to our society, to the world, to basically betterment of the humanity, whether it is for environmental purposes or social or economic or whatever. We all are equally empowered in a way. And then of course one can...
And it does...
Sorry. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just to say that also it doesn't mean that we all have to be changing the world. We are already changing the world if we show up differently in our families. And if somebody is just boss of a household or a parent on a parental leave, they're already changing the world by the way they're educating their child, or by the way they are handling a conflict differently to how they would have been doing it the past 10, 20, 30 years of their life. So it doesn't mean that we all have to be presidents of a country or European commissioners. So, I mean, I don't mean to sound like that. I think it's important that we just continue doing the exploration. And if today we feel a better and more aligned person that we were yesterday, then that's enough.
Absolutely. I was about to say exactly the same thing that you said, that we don't have to be, these big shots in business or politics or something. We all are equally empowered, and we must do that. And there is a contribution, every one of us is doing, but the only contribution is that when you stay positive. The moment we start thinking negative or being frustrated or being so-called, jealous of the other things or people around us, I think that's the end. So staying positive, and I like your part of being or having fun in doing that. I think that would be much more ideal, because even in my case, I'm quite a serious person to a great extent in the world, but I need to be a little bit more light, as you said. That's a good part. So that was absolutely brilliant, Lucia. I'm sure this is not our only conversation. I would like, once this lockdown is over, would like to come over to Brussels and have a detailed face-to-face interview with you. By that time, your book would be out as well. I thought that I could delay putting this interview online until your book is released, so that I can have even more, viewership, but I think that may be a bit late. I would be hopefully doing that in the next few days on my YouTube channel, and then we can do for sure another one, once your book is released. We can focus a little bit more on, let's say, one aspect of probably the careers. You're quite expert on gender empowerment or something, but we would definitely continue this conversation, because what I was looking for is exactly what you have given. It's the inspiration. It's inspiration because you are a person, of course you are an important person, not to say that you're not an important person, but you have given your perspective as a human being, as a contributor to the society, and that is what we need. You have not given your perspective in your official position, but in your personal position. And that is what we need to understand, that how we as individuals can change the world. We don't have to have the titles on our shoulders all of the times. So we are really, really grateful for your time, Lucia. As I said, we will continue this conversation in future as well. Best of luck with your transformation, and best of luck for your book as well.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the continuation of the conversation. I equally think that you're doing an excellent job out there in Geneva for the international organization space. I hope that this conversation will attract many new subscribers. So everybody just click that subscribe button to continue following future interviews. And I'll be delighted to be part of the conversation if I can add in any way. So all the best to everybody.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be adding that. So thank you very much. And with that, goodbye, viewers. And thank you very much, Lucy. Have a good day and good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.